So lovely. Okay, so these are just very informal, and we'll start with a little prayer and meditation, but really, you make it what you want it to be. So if you have questions, if you want to take it in a certain direction, you can ask anything about the path, about Ananda, some experience we had with Swamiji, about our life, whatever you would like to ask. So there's everything's free game, so to speak. And speaking of free game, we have a friend who lives at Ananda. Oh, she has property right next to Ananda. And we have a lot of wild turkeys, a lot of deer, a lot of animals, deer and wild turkeys and Canadian geese, a lot of animals wandering around, bears. And so our friend who owns property next to Ananda, or near Ananda, she said her parents were visiting, and she came home one day, and there on the barbecue grill was a turkey. Her parents had shot and killed, and they said, there's so much wildlife around here, and they were barbecuing the turkey. And we can't tell her the name of this person because she would be mortified, but anyway, speaking of free game, anything you would like to ask, you go ahead.
So we're the turkeys, grill us. Okay, let's pray together. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, friend, beloved God, great masters, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, beloved Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda Ji, saints of all religions, we humbly bow to you all. Bless us and guide us as we tread the path that leads to thee, and use us as thy channels to share your light and love with everyone we meet. Om. Peace. Amen. Just meditate for a minute or two. shanti, shanti, shanti. Okay.
So if you have a question, raise your hand. James has the mic. He will bring it to you. And it's turned on. You don't have to fuss with it. And you can pull your mask down. And then hold it real close like you're going to take a bite out of a cookie. And otherwise, the sound doesn't get picked up. Hello.
We need some brave soul to start it off.
Yay, Sharmila.
So I really enjoyed so much your talk about energy last night, especially thinking about it in relationship to will and willingness. And I guess my question is kind of two-part. One is, what about all those times where I consciously don't want to have energy? And just thinking about Swamiji and how it seems like in all that we hear about him and those experiences I've had that he was...
Hold the mic up.
Energy, energy, energy. And so I'm wondering about dealing with that, not so much when energy is low because of sickness or ill health, but more when there's a conscious choice that I really don't want a lot of energy. And then my other part of that question is just to the two of you during this pandemic, when you have been home all these months, did you experience times of that kind of energy low, or is it at times a battle to keep that energy up?
Thank you. That's
Yeah,
a very nice question, a very honest question.
Yeah, and a very pertinent, very important question. For all of us, our energy goes up and down. And part of staying on the spiritual path for a lifetime is to accept that there will be highs and lows. That is just a part of that. If we set the bar too high, then we're going to fail in that. And if we set it too low, we're not going to succeed sufficiently. So somewhere in there. But where the bar is has to get adjusted according, and we have to accept the fact that there are going to be variations. So how do you develop more? Within each person, there's a kind of a spectrum. And sometimes it's like if you've got a donkey that won't move, you need to take a switch to it and get it to move. And if you're experiencing a period of time where unwillingness is just kind of repetitive, then sometimes you need to use will to overcome that period. At other times, if the donkey is tired, and legitimately so, it's unfair to take a switch to it. And so, depending on the stresses in your life, depending on demands, depending on the state of health, both physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, you kind of have to feel whether it is time to push a little bit against, let's call it the unwillingness monster. Sometimes you have to push back, and at other times you have to accept the fact that it's not time to push. And Swami said about yoga, it's the art and science of yoga. Well, life, it's the art and science. So there isn't one answer that you always do this or always do that. It does help if something's going on a while. to try with benevolent detachment to ask yourself what's going on. Why am I being unwilling? And is there something that needs a corrective in me? Sometimes it will help if you have a trusted advisor to talk with them, a mentor, or somebody that you can talk through this with, that won't judge you for, bad attitude to even bring it up, kind of thing. So you just have to kind of work with it. But gradually, if you do keep working with it, and I can say this over a long period of time, gradually you kind of get to the point where resistance is futile, and you just kind of give in to the fact that you need to keep going whether you want to or not. And but even within that, you have to have rest periods, because you can't keep pushing at the red line all the time. And so it'll depend on a lot of factors. But so I don't have a real clear answer, but the principle is that the greater the willingness that you have, the greater the flow of energy there will be. So you do need to work on opening that flow of willingness. But how you do it depends on circumstances.
Yeah, and I would add,
Good chai.
yeah, it's very good chai. Very often dampened energy or unwillingness or resistance, whatever, they're all facets of the same stone. It's, again, try to look inside yourself and say, where is this coming from? Is it coming from an emotional kind of depressive state? Is it coming from just being overwhelmed by the problems in the world around me? Try to, it's often not directly related to what you're doing. It's often just related to more emotional, kind of downward pulling emotions. And so look at that. And, Swami gives the example in the Raja Yoga course, you look at, you come home and there's a sink full of dirty dishes and you think, oh God, I just don't have any energy to do that. And then your friend calls you up on the phone, well, you want to go out to dinner? Yeah, that'd be great. So it's, the flow of energy depends on what's motivating it. And if you're in a period of kind of, oh God, I don't want to do anything, try to break the pattern by finding things you really do want to do, whatever they may be. Maybe it's eating a box of chocolates. Maybe it's, going to see a really bad movie. Well, we haven't been able to go to, but just doing something that you want to do. And that primes the pump and gets the energy going. And going in the zoo, going horseback riding, I don't know what your interests are, but find something that you'll say yes to. And then once the energy starts moving, then everything looks different. And yes, it's been hard. It's been hard on everybody. You read in the news the addiction to drugs, to overcome drinking and drugs is going way up during the pandemic, more than, people getting illness from the virus. And none of us are untouched by it, because there's what's going on now. To step back, it's a battle of light and darkness. Contractive energy is what we were speaking of some last night, an expansive energy. And we're caught in that. And so as I say, what you need to do is find, however dumb you may think, oh God, it's so dumb, no, if you're wanting to do it, if you will say yes to do it, it's a means to an end to get your energy going again. And you should give yourself permission to do it, whatever it is. And how did we, yeah, I felt claustrophobic at times. I mean, we were, you know, we haven't left the village since March 2020, you know, and that's unusual for us. We were saying we would hear this little whimpering coming from our storage room where we keep our suitcases, like, why aren't you using me anymore? We're just sitting here. And how did we adjust? We walked every day to keep our energy up. And sometimes I didn't want to, or one of the other of us wouldn't want to, and the other would say, come on, we're gonna go, okay. Find a walking buddy. That, I don't know, maybe you have it already, but just somebody that will help you keep that you're both committed to keeping your energy moving. So it's doable. You can take your mask down when you ask the question. Yay, we get to see your face.
So when I think about surrender, it sounds like you have to surrender your own will and attune yourself to the divine will. And there is a part of me that is also wondering how much tips on how to surrender the right way without it becoming like a passive state where you are just like not putting enough energy, or maybe just kind of, oh well, I'm just gonna let it go, or going to the extreme, right?
Yeah.
So having that balance, how do you keep that balance?
Okay. Could you all hear what she asked? Okay. Okay. Surrender is a very, very dynamic state of awareness, true surrender. It's the ultimate act of courage and faith and energetic self-offering. And so there isn't passive surrender, that's just giving up. That's a different thing. But true surrender is saying, God, whatever you give me in life, I take it. What you give, I take. You know, that's the story of Master at the wedding, when he was giving roses to some of the disciples that were there, and he gave one woman a pink rose, or a red rose, I don't remember the colors exactly, but he gave her a rose, and she said, oh, I didn't want a pink rose, I wanted a red rose. And Master looked, I mean, it seems silly, insignificant, but Master looked at her very strongly and said, what I give, you take. And so if we can develop that attitude of life, not just, oh, I don't want this, and oh, what if that happens, or oh, what the hell, you know, whatever happens, happens. No, just dynamic match it. Whatever happens to you, match it with your own willing energy and acceptance. Say, what comes of itself, let it come. And that's why, you know, Master gave the interpretation of the passage in the Bible from Christ, saying, if someone slaps you, turn the other cheek. And he said, people don't understand that. They think, okay, you just hit me again, I'll be passive. And the Master said, and Swami shared, it's the act of the ultimate courageous person to say, whatever karma is coming to me, let it all come. I will take it and I will face it. And if it comes from you, I accept it. So maybe instead of surrender, you think of dynamic acceptance and faith. That if it's from you, I love it, whatever it is. If it's the community burning down, if it's being diagnosed with a terminal disease, whatever it is, you just say, if it comes from you, I accept it, and I have faith that it will turn out good in the end. So it's really, surrender is it's a beautiful consciousness if it's done right.
There's a balance, you know. Master said that at different times he called two different prayers the highest prayer. One was, reveal thyself that I may reveal to others. He said that's the highest prayer. At another time, he said that the highest prayer is, I will reason, I will, I will act. But guide thou my reason, will, and activity to the right thing in every path. And so that gives a balance between, so talking about surrender, I will reason, I will, I will act, doesn't sound very much like surrender. And it isn't supposed to. But you guide my energy. Let my reason, will, and activity guide thou my reason. So to find that balance is a really good goal for a devotee. Where is the balance between I'm initiating and I'm going to do my best to accomplish, and then the sense of accepting guidance and accepting results according to God's will. In the Bhagavad Gita, this is the principle of Nishkan karma, that we have to act. We have to do, it's our duty to do the very best we can. But we should not be attached to the fruits, either positive or negative, to the fruits of our action. That's up to God to determine the fruits. But our duty is to act. And it's one of the primary teachings of Krishna to Arjuna and of the Bhagavad Gita. So finding that balance is...
Tips on how to find that balance, but tips.
How do you find the balance, Mark? She's asking. It starts with faith. Really, faith that God is guiding your life. How do you find faith? By feeling through meditation and devotion to feel God's presence in your life, to know that God loves you, that He wouldn't bring you anything that wasn't for your benefit, even though it may hurt in the short term. So it all comes back to forming a loving relationship with God. And how do we do that? Everyone does it in a different way. We've shared with you once at a Kriya, some of you, at a Kriya initiation when we all went up for the blessing. Afterwards, Swamiji commented to a small group standing nearby. He said, when each of you came up for the blessing, I had a unique experience where I felt, or he said I had experience I had never had before. I felt the unique path that each of you would follow to find God. And it was thrilling for many reasons that, he saw how we were going to find God, but then also unique. We all have a unique path to walk. And the test that you will have will not be the test that Sharmila has. And you have to find your way through them with faith and discrimination and devotion to the Guru. But that's the beautiful thing about community, is that we're all, it's like a group of us come in the room now. Okay, we all look more or less the same. But each one of us is working out our karma. Each one of us is having a different battle with delusion. And yet, I can't fight your battle, you can't fight my battle. But I can support you in your efforts to fight your battle. And that's a beautiful thing. That's the beautiful thing about community. You just look around and you see people's eyes and you know they're going through it, but they're trying. And you do what you can to support them. So, okay.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. What's helped you accept all the parts of yourself, especially the parts that perhaps you would rather not have, so you can step fully onto the path with everything and offer it up to Master?
Boy.
See, Jyotish doesn't have any parts like that. So
No. I don't know that accept is quite the right term. I would say more recognize that they exist. So recognizing that something exists and that it is one thing that helps is to not identify with it. To say, okay, I have this tendency, but it's not me, it's a tendency that I have. Swami was in India, and there's a very, very fine devotee in India, and she is at a high level in society. And at the time that she asked this question, one of the things that was a constant in her life was going to parties and cocktail parties and so on. And so she came to Swami and she said, Swamiji, I have this question. I drink alcohol, and quite honestly, I enjoy drinking alcohol. What should I do about it? She said, I know it's part of the teachings that I shouldn't drink alcohol. And Swami said, well, first of all, understand that drinking alcohol is tamasic. It will draw your consciousness down. But having understood that, don't identify yourself as an alcohol drinker. Just say, I have this habit. And so recognizing that you have a behavior pattern and identifying with it are two very different things. So we do need to recognize, and we do need to understand that there are things that we should change about ourselves. But it comes back to Sharmila's question. There are times when we're not willing to work on that challenge yet. That doesn't mean that we say, oh, I've got to accept myself. I've got to accept that I'm an alcoholic. No. But we might have to say, I'm not willing to face that at this point, but I know at some point I'm going to need to. To finish the story with this, the woman came back and said, you know, without consciously deciding, a week later, I stopped drinking alcohol and have never tasted it again. And so it was, I think Swami was helping take that karma away. But the principle of what he said is really important for your question. So accept isn't quite for me the right term. Recognize, and sometimes you need to accept the fact that you're not ready to deal with something yet. And then I would say finally, don't beat yourself up. You know, we have, especially yogis have the temperament of a fine craftsman. And so I do some woodworking. And so I could be working, for example, on a beautiful table, and a person comes in and they say, oh, that's absolutely beautiful. And I'd say, no, it's not. You should see this. There's a little scratch here that I haven't sanded out yet. And we have that tendency that we are overly critical of small things. And it's not a terrible tendency because it drives us forward. But so just, I don't know, relax about it and say I'm a work in progress. And I'll get rid of those scratches, or I'll quit caring about them. A lot of times, whatever we're really worried about, we don't need to change at all. That's why Swami went to Master one time and said, I love Swami, Master, I love good food. How am I going to get over that desire? And Master said, love God. When you love God enough, all these other desires, they just fall away. So keep working in a positive direction, and don't worry too much about the flaws, whether accepting them or not accepting them, beating yourself up about them. It doesn't help. Put your energy 90% in the positive practices that lift your mind.
Swami also said, if you see a flaw in yourself, don't worry about it, rejoice, because it's always been there. You just never saw it before.
Yeah.
And now that you can see it, you can start to work on it. And so that's, and again, don't say it's you. You say, don't say Suryani tends to always be late or whatever, you know. Just say Suryani, or I always tend to be late. You say, this is a habit that I'm working on. It's not me. And so there's that little bit of detachment. And that's why we come on the path. I mean, really, it's so simple as that. If we, you know the story that once we were doing a New Year's retreat at the Expanding Light, and we were having all the guests write down things they wanted to change about themselves. I was leading the exercise, and so I was writing down things too. And afterwards, this man in the group came up to me and said, I find that really depressing. And I said, what? And he said, you've been here all these years and you're still working on things? And just then my dear friend Roma came walking by, who's in Bangalore now. And she said, she has a wonderful sense of humor. She said to this man, Devi is the only one in our community that isn't perfect yet, and that's why we have her work with the guests. And, you know, of course that's, you know, we're all working on our stuff. And when you see it, and when it comes up again, you think, here it is again, the hydra-headed monster. And, you know, then you just work on it again. But don't get discouraged, because that's really the nature of the spiritual path. Being aware of where you're, I don't know, your misjudgment is, where your wrong attitude is. Don't identify with it and say, well, work on that. And we have a friend who used to be real critical and judgmental of other people. And so she developed this habit when she starts criticizing somebody, like she'll say, oh, that's Ganesh, he's always telling lies. And then she'll say, just like me. And she always adds that, just like me. And she said it really broke the habit of her saying judgmental things about other people. But play tricks with it too. You're probably very good at games. When you see yourself going in a direction, find a way you can trick it. It's like a puppy that needs to be trained.
Okay, John has a question.
Uh-oh, he's got a whole list.
Oh, okay. He says some waking states of deep Turiya sleep. Turiya, the state beyond dreamless sleep in which the superconscious becomes overly active. How does it differ from meditation superconsciousness? Is Turiya sleep like this story told by Swami, dreaming he was being burned at the stake? Thank you for the feedback.
Let me just see, because it's very important how it's written. Okay, part of the problem with that is that the way Master wrote it, it's a states of deep Turiya, comma, sleep. So it isn't Turiya sleep. It states deep Turiya. Turiya is superconsciousness, and then sleep is another state. So that's...
Yeah, and one might say that Turiya is... Master said that in deep sleep, we were in counterfeit Samadhi. In the dreaming state, we're in the astral realm. And so Turiya, the state of Turiya, is more akin to the deep sleep, where there is, one might say, the memory of who we are, as opposed to the attempt to reach there. So how does it differ from superconscious meditation? I don't know that they're really different. I think maybe in superconsciousness there are many facets to it. So one might be deep self-offering in a superconscious way. That would be a facet, but it wouldn't be Turiya. Turiya would be, oh yes, I remember this state. I remember this state of superconscious, I don't know, realization. So it's the kind of awakened memory of what one already is, as opposed to striving towards something. But, you know, sometimes these terms that are not native to us, it's hard to try to even define in English words. Probably if we all knew Sanskrit and Indian philosophy deeply enough, there would be innuendos to the term Turiya that wouldn't apply to superconsciousness and so on. But I suspect that sometimes it isn't always helpful to try to tease out the deep aspects of our ignorance. Just accept things, that there is the state of superconscious remembrance of who we are, and that's what we want to go into.
But, you know, Master said to memorize his poem Samadhi and repeat it daily. And it's a wonderful spiritual practice. I mean, every line. I mean, we've chosen some highlights, and I've been so enjoying looking at them while we've been in the temple, because in fact, let's do that. Why don't we, you can start, Adriana. You read the first one, and then Jyoti read the next one, and I'll read one of them out loud. Read it out loud.
By deeper, longer, thirsty, guru-given meditation comes this celestial samadhi.
Now just pause a little and try to feel what that's really communicating, really saying to you. I'll just say, to me, just looking at it, glancing at it now, maybe it'd be different later, the word that really stands out is thirsty. You know, so often meditation seems like it's a chore, but when you're thirsty, drinking a glass of water is the last thing you define as a chore.
And what stands out to me is Guru given.
Yeah.
Because it's everything we're talking about, you know, like how do you surrender, how do you overcome resistance, how do you deal with flaws in yourself? Guru given. It's all Guru gives the power to do all those things.
Okay, Jyoti.
You read the next one.
In joy I came, for joy I lived, in sacred joy I went again.
You look like you've memorized it.
Yeah. Good.
Good for you.
Good.
Any comments on that one?
Okay, who would like to read the next?
Okay, we're just
Okay.
going.
Myself with everything enters the great myself.
Wonderful. Someone was asking us in another session about what's consciousness? How I'm supposed to expand my consciousness, but I don't even know what consciousness is. And we didn't have time to say, but I wanted to point that out to him. Conscious myself in everything enters the great myself. That's consciousness.
Serenity and I.
Eternity.
Eternity. I don't have glasses. Eternity and I are one united ray.
It's sort of like going to the eye doctors.
Yeah. E-T.
Eternity and I, one united ray.
Yay.
Good for you. 2020.
And then it's the same thing about consciousness. We're one with eternity. We're not this little body that's going to get old and have aches and pains. We're not the ego that we identify with, but we're a united ray with eternity. Do you want to? Can you see the last one?
I just wanted to make a comment
Good.
about that eternity, the I, one right. Just a thought that we are ever and always be conscious of ourself. It's sort of scary and just comforting at the same time that we will always exist. And yeah, eternity and
I just
I.
love being around devotees, you know. Just we all have the same thoughts, you know, the same doubts, the same fears, and the same understandings.
A tiny bubble of laughter, I am become the sea of mirth itself. Yay!
Yeah, what a beautiful line that is.
Okay, so can you read from the back? Okay.
The storm of Maya stilled by magic wand of intuition deep.
Wonderful.
That's a very interesting statement, that the storm of Maya, the delusion of Maya, how does it get stilled? Not with the mind, not with activity, not with seva, not with beating ourselves up, just by coming into, Master talked about intuition as being the soul's quality of knowing, soul's ability to know. So it comes from that, the storm of delusion gets stilled when we come into our soul nature, and it's just there. You know, we're kind of working toward arriving at that point that we already have arrived at. So it's quite a spiritual conundrum. But we already are that which we're trying to become.
And it's like that story, if you were with us last night, that our woman who's in the congregation shared. She's a nurse and began working in the COVID ward in the hospital early on in the pandemic when it was scary. No one knew how it was transmitted. We didn't know how serious it was. Was it always terminal? You know, all those things. And she went into a patient's room and she was scared. And then the storm of Maya, where she was all roiled up, and then she said, she just asked Master to help her, and she felt this elevated consciousness where she didn't feel like she was herself. She said, I felt like I was watching a drama.
Out of the body, watching the drama.
Out of the drama. And I went over to the man and I put my hand on his arm and said, how are you doing? And he just started crying. He said, no one has touched me for a week. I've been so lonely in this hospital. And she said, she asked him if he wanted a bed bath, you know, and to help him and so forth. But how did that happen? The storm of Maya, where it's all around us, but intuition deep. You break through Maya and you realize you're free, nothing touches you. And she said from that day on, for the next year and a half, she's never been afraid and continued to work in the COVID ward. Okay, where are we? Okay.
Present, past, future, no more for me, but ever present, all flowing I everywhere.
Beautiful.
That's a really hard one to wrap our head around from our state of consciousness, that there really is no past or present or future, or everything is past, present, and future, whichever way you look at it. But that, as they call it, the arrow of time, everything, all events seem to be moving in one direction. It's, you know, I've been trying to wrap, you know, you can intellectualize it, but to really feel that everything is happening in an eternal present is quite a high state.
Oh, now I know who you are. Hi.
So thou art I am thou, knowing, knower, known as one.
Yeah, we were talking about this one with the group before, that the knowing the process of knowing, the knower, the person going through the process, and the known, the realization of truth, they're all one. It's such an amazing thought that the very process that we go through, which we feel, oh, I'm not a good person, or I have this flaw and all of this process, it's one with the knowing. It's one with the known. You know, it's part of God. So it's
dynamic.
And it's dynamic.
The knowing part.
Yeah, the knowing part. Very good. Okay, who's up next?
Enjoyable beyond imagination of expectancy, Samadhi bliss.
That's one of the most famous lines of all of the poem. Beyond imagination of expectancy. All we can do is look forward to that day.
We think we can imagine eternity. It kind of comes back to your question, John. We think we can define these things with our mind, and our mind just basically doesn't even touch the first stitch of the hem of eternity. It just, or in this case, the bliss that comes in Samadhi. It's an experience that transcends so far the limitations of the mental process that we are engaged in.
And
okay.
Wait, before we come to the last one, Rose will finish it up for us. But, you know, at the end of Swamiji's life, and we were with him, we had the blessing of being with him through many trials and tests, severe health challenges and financial problems, and every which way God tested him. But at the end of his life, we would sometimes, he'd invite us down to his house for tea, and we'd come over. When I say down, our house is at the Crystal Hermitage, and we had to walk down the steps to get to his house. And he didn't have good hearing, so we'd walk into his room, and he'd be sitting in his recliner chair, and he hadn't heard us come in. And he was in such a state of bliss. It was just, I mean, it was hard to walk in and intrude and break in on that. And then he would sense our presence, and he would, you know, he never was a poser. You know, he would just, oh, would you like some tea? Come in, come in, come in. And then at the end, he also said, I feel so much bliss, I can barely stand it. So he got there.
Yeah.
And his life wasn't easy. So Rose, you wrap it up for us.
I, the cosmic sea, watch the little ego floating in me.
And that answers everything we've been talking about. The little ego floats in the cosmic sea of God's love.
Yeah. But isn't it really an interesting concept that at a certain level of perception, it's almost like we see the duality of being out of form and in form. So we're the everything, but there's an ego, and we watch that floating in our greatness. So we could really just kind of meditate on that. I mean, there are so many things in the poem Samadhi, but each of these we could meditate on them, or kind of really. There was a term from a novel called grok, meaning that you really
get
it. And if probably any of these things, if we really got it, it would elevate our consciousness.
And that. Why don't you, each of you, take one of these sayings, maybe it's the one you read that not everybody got to read, but take one of them and bring it home in your mind. Don't take the glass plate down. And really, I'm going to take one.
Yeah, work with it.
Yeah, take one and work with it, and use it as, it's God's teaching you something you need to know. So we could ask another question, but let's each of us take a moment to pick one of those that we want to use as a guide. Okay, just work on it as long as you like. I mean, over the days ahead. So, this is the last little satsang we're having, the 6th one. And so you all get to be the kind of representatives of everybody who's gone before. And Jyotish and I just want to share with you the love of satsang with you, our blessings that Master continue to guide your lives, bring you ever closer to the shores of His bliss, of His unconditional love. And may each one of you be a channel for Master's love to all whom you meet. Thank you for sharing in the consciousness of God and Guru together.